Hey, what's up, Arsenal? Thank you so much for sticking around for this part of our Arsenal online experience. Hey, if you're new here, my name is Chad. I get the privilege of being one of the pastors here at this community that we call the Arsenal, and we're just glad that you joined us. Thank you so much for being a part of this experience online. Hey, today I get the privilege of kicking off a new series of talks that we've titled Like a Good Neighbor. All right, how many of you sang the jingle in your head? The other day when I was talking to Maddie's my wife, when I was talking to Maddie, I said the name of the series and she sang the end of the jingle. We'll have some fun with that, I'm sure, during this series, but Like a Good Neighbor is our new series of talks. Before we get into it, I got a couple questions for you. So in the chats, let me know if this is you. Did you grow up in church? Like as a kid, did you grow up in church? Like maybe you went to children's church or Sunday school. Do you guys remember Sunday school? Like that hour before church that we would go and learn before we went to children's church? You know, now we can barely keep you here for 45 minutes online. But back then you were there for like 2 hours learning and yeah, all that stuff. Sunday school, you guys remember that? Did you grow up in church? Did you go to Sunday school or children's church as a kid? For those of us that remember Sunday school or children's church, there was a lot of times that the teacher would tell a story or go through a biblical story, and then they would ask questions. And it was always fun to see who answered the question, right? But when you didn't know the answer, there was a pretty safe bet on what answer you could give. Even if you got called out and they were like, all right, Chad, what is the answer to this question? Pretty safe bet was what? I put it in the chat right now. What was the safe answer in children's church that you would give to a question that you didn't know the answer to? Jesus, right? Like that's what Jesus was always the answer. Like just like if you're taking a test and like it's multiple choice, like go with C. It's pretty much it's the best option. But in these questions, especially in children's church, or like Jesus was like the answer. That's what we were going for. While that might be true most of the time, right? Interestingly, Jesus himself, if you read through the Gospels, was not really good at actually answering questions. Instead, asking a lot of questions is kind of how he operated. In fact, if you look at the Gospels, if you look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is these recordings by some of his disciples of the life of Jesus on this earth, right? This is what we see of what Jesus had done on this earth, how he lived life. If you look at the Gospels, you'll see that Jesus asked a lot of questions. And he was asked a lot of questions, but he didn't answer very many of them. In fact, I'm going to get into a little bit of statistics on that. But before I give you all those stats, I want to throw up a community chat question. We do these in person, and I like doing them online, but I want you to just kind of think about it right now. And then later on, you can put your answer in the chat. But here's the question. If you could ask Jesus one question that you knew he would answer directly, what would it be? If you could ask him one question, what would it be? So just kind of start thinking about that as I go through some of these stats. So here's the deal. Jesus, during his time on earth, the Gospels record a lot of questions asked to him and questions that Jesus asked. In fact, Jesus asked 307 questions. He was asked 183 questions. And he only directly answered 8 of those questions. 183 questions he was asked. He only answered 8 of them directly. If you do the math, Jesus was more than 40 times more likely to ask a question than he was to answer one directly. 40 times. And if he did answer a question, he was 20 times more likely to answer that question indirectly. Like not with a direct response, maybe telling a story or going off on this like teaching moment that just didn't sound like it was direct, but he was getting us there. For the most part, when you think of questions and answers, if I ask a question and you give the answer, that it closes that conversation. It closes the moment of trying to grasp more information. But what questions do, questions are open. They open things up for us. They send us in this place where we begin to think and process and wonder more. In fact, it's pretty telling that the word question involves or contains the word quest in it. A question often sends you on a journey, typically in search of something valuable. So questions played a major role in the life of Jesus. Questions, in fact, have a lot in common with another thing, another favorite teaching tool of Jesus, the parables, right? These are the stories that Jesus would tell to get to an understanding of what he was talking about. In both questions and parables, Jesus is able to communicate indirectly. And in both of those instances, the listener has to do some of the work. If the goal is to communicate like this body of knowledge, this information, then direct communication, direct answers, or lecturing would have been the more appropriate way to do that. But the goal of both the questions that Jesus asked and the parables, it may be a little different. The goal is not to communicate knowledge or information, but it was to elicit new understanding in the listener or the person asking the question. Information, in fact, is not the goal here. Transformation is. So at the Arsenal, one of the things that we have this thing, we call it the Arsenal Code. It's on our website if you go check it out. But the Arsenal Code is just some of the values that we hold to. The Arsenal Code is something that we believe, like, this is who we are. This is the culture. This is what we're made up of. And one of those Arsenal Code values is that growth happens in the questions. Like, we don't want to be the answer people any more than Jesus wanted to be the answer person. In fact, around here, we often call this life with Christ a journey or a quest, if you will, that each of us are on individually, and we are learning to understand what it looks like to live from that life of Christ. So the hope is that on this journey, transformation happens, but I believe where transformation happens is through that questioning process. It's through understanding that we have all the wisdom of Christ in us, that we can pull from that wisdom within us as we step into situations. And it's not always a direct answer, but this understanding of transformation and wisdom that we are operating from. I like how Bob Goff, he's a writer, he's written a few books, but Bob Goff describes this transformation that we walk through. This transformation of someone is someone who has placed this belief in Jesus, right? And as we are transforming, he says that we are becoming love. It's this beautiful idea that as we come into our own, as we begin to understand who God is and who we are, it plays out in a way where in Christ, we are becoming love. And not just any love, but agape love. Agape is this Greek word that describes a different type of love. It's a love that is selfless, it's sacrificial, it is unconditional love. We are becoming agape. These next 4 weeks, we're going to look at some of the questions asked by Jesus and asked to Jesus and how he responded. One, he answered directly. Others, he asked more questions or told parables to get the listener thinking. But they're questions that we see throughout his ministry that I think have some massive implications for us. So I'm going to go back to our community chat question. You've had some time now to think about it. So in the chat, before we look at knowing all of what Jesus has done, I want to ask you a question. If you could ask Jesus one question that you knew he would answer, what would that question be? Put it in the chats. Let's see what it looks like. I'm not going to answer it. I just want to see what kind of questions we might ask Jesus, knowing that he would give a direct answer. Because Jesus did answer a few questions directly when he was asked them in the gospel. In fact, earlier, like I said, he answered 8 questions. We're going to look at one of those answers today, and over these next 4 weeks, hopefully we'll spark some curiosity and engage some questions we might have about Jesus' answer. Because when I see Jesus' answers in this gospel story, I've got more questions. And we're going to see what that looks like as we get into it. But let's check out the question and answer in Matthew. We're going to be in Matthew 22. I'll start in verse 34, and here it goes. But when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. He said, "Teacher, which is the great commandment in the law?" And he said to him, Jesus answering the lawyer, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That is the great and first commandment. And a second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all of the law and the prophets." Like when asked by this lawyer, would have been, it's a Pharisee, it's someone who knew the law. He knew the 613 Hebrew laws. He knew where they came from, what they meant, and how we were to operate within them, or how they were as Hebrews, as Jews, to operate within the law. He was asking Jesus to test him, to make Jesus make a statement where he maybe put one law or commandment above the rest. And he knew that he could trap Jesus in this moment. If there was ever a moment for Jesus to avoid an answer, I would think it would have been now, where a lawyer who knows the law and already hates Jesus, does not like Jesus. Jesus is, in fact, he stepped into a place where he is messing up what the Pharisees have going on. Because at the time, as a religious leader, as an expert in the law, they were operating in a way where, if you can imagine, like if somebody needed something, or if something was happening in the community and they needed something from God, the elite, the religious elite, the lawyer, the one that knew the law would say, "Oh, well, if you just gave a little more money, a little more offering, sacrifice, then God will bless you." You see, they weren't as worried about actually serving the people around them. They were more worried about how they could keep power and money. And so when Jesus stepped in and began to poke holes in their system and show that this is never going to work, they were mad at him. In fact, it eventually leads to them killing Jesus. So in this moment, Jesus knows this could get him into hot water. But Matthew and Mark, interestingly, in John, the story is actually recorded differently, and we'll talk through that in the next couple weeks on why that might be. But they record that Jesus answered this question somewhat directly. I say somewhat because the man asked for a commandment, and you see that Jesus gives 2, really. It's definitely someone trying to trap Jesus, but he still answers him directly. What's the greatest commandment? Jesus was being asked to raise one commandment above the others, which he knew would be stepping out of line. But he answers very carefully and directly. He says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And the second is like it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets." Jesus directly answers, but also indirectly. The man asks for a greatest commandment, but Jesus ties 2 commandments together. On all these 2, he says, depend all the law and the prophets, all of them. Jesus says that if you do this, you've found the part of you found the hinge, the main thing of this entire thing. Love God and love your neighbor, and you've figured it out. These are important because in that moment, I think Jesus knew that, one, he's quoting law back to a lawyer, but he also knew that they weren't doing both. Because to say that you love God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, a Pharisee, especially at that time, and even now, a Pharisee would be like, "Oh yeah, I do that." But when Jesus ties them together, and says, but to love your neighbor as yourself is just as important. In fact, they are intertwined. He's caught him. When I hear as a grace guy, right, as a guy that teaches new covenant, that believes that we live under a new covenant, that because of grace, I have received the life of Christ, and this is where I live and what I live from now. To hear the words commandment already throw some questions up in my mind. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is a commandment, the greatest commandment. The first question I have is, how do I do that? Like, we're talking all. What is all of my heart? What is all of my soul? What is all of my mind? Can my mind cannot think of other things? Can I ever have doubts? How do I operate in this? If I have doubts, does that mean that I no longer am loving God? What does that look like? And we could start poking holes, but when Jesus says all, I think he means all. So what does that mean for me? Like I said, the word commandment for like a grace guy, for a guy that's just a Jesus guy, right? Like because of Jesus, we've received grace. The words commandment are tough for me. They're not words that we use because we're no longer under the law. We are under grace. Even Paul refers to the 10 commandments. Some commandments that I've even heard other pastors call recently. I was watching an interview with two like big pastors, major influence. They called this the top 10 list for God. Yeah, but that's also the same list that Paul refers to as a ministry of death and a ministry of condemnation, the 10 commandments. So commandments to me is not a word that I like or talk about much. It's not, because a commandment is you must do this or something happens. So we're going to spend a week or two talking through these thoughts and the questions. What questions do you have when Jesus says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, and all your soul? What questions does that bring up for you? Are they similar to mine where you wonder how? What does that look like? Who's the judge of all? Is it God? Because if God is judging, if I'm loving you with all of my heart, then how do I ever know how I'm doing? Is there like progress reports? Like what does this look like? I got questions. And I'm okay with that. And then you get into the next one, the second commandment, which is just like the first. And he says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So we're going to talk through this one quite a bit over the next few weeks, but there's a lot more questions I have. Like, how do I love someone as much as I love myself? How much do I really love myself? Who's my neighbor? Is there like a defining line in this? Are we just talking the person that lives next door to me? Where do we work that in? How does one justify loving them? Like if it's somebody that I'm like, man, they're just not, like, why would I love them? How do we justify that? How do we operate within that? What do we do? We're going to see that in some of these stories that Jesus unpacks, a parable he tells and things like that. But what does love for my neighbor actually look like? Like tangibly, what does that look like? How do I do that? How do I love my neighbor as much as I love myself? Is there like a set way of rules to do this? Like there's a ton of people, I know there's some people like on the other side of the screen that like love checklists, right? Like you're all about checklist. In fact, like Maudie loves checklists. Maudie will make checklists and she checks that thing off when she finishes. She loves it. For me, I'm like, I had a checklist somewhere. I don't know, did I do it on my phone? Did I write it? Like checklists are tough. Like I like them, but half the time I forget where I put them. It's just ADD. It's the world I live in. But is there rules? Is there like set list of how I should do this? Or can I love them like in my heart from afar? Do I have to like engage people? Is that part of it? Like what does that look like? Do I have to tell them that I love them? Or can they just kind of like maybe know it? Like how does this work? I've got questions. In fact, Jesus says everything in the law and prophets hangs on this. Can I do one without the other? Can I love God, but just kind of like my neighbor? Or can I just avoid my neighbor altogether? Or can do I define who my neighbor is? Or is this statement more true? You can't love God without loving your neighbor. Or you could say it this way, you don't love God if you're not loving your neighbor. Those are, again, for those of us in the grace world and new covenant, and these are harsh statements. Even for me, I'm like, am I being judged on my behavior, on how I do this? Because that doesn't add up for me. But if you think that's harsh, let's look at the Apostle John that wrote the Gospel of John, and then also wrote a couple letters later, a couple books later. And we're going to read from 1 John and how he addresses this, what this looks like, why we love, and how we love. So in 1 John 4, verse 16, he says, "So we have come to know and believe the love that God has for us. God is love. And whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him." We are surrounded in this thing of love. "By this is love perfected within us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also are we in this world. There's no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love." Verse 19, "We love because he first loved us." And verse 20, "If anyone says, 'I love God,' and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, whoever loves God must also love his brother." You see, John is saying here that the way that you love others is a physical representation of how you love God. If you can't love your brother who you can see, how can you ever love a God who you can't? This is what John is asking. So I ask again, how do I show that I love my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? How do I love them? I don't know how you can separate the two. To love God is to love your neighbor. Jesus says that this is the commandment. This is what the life of Christ in and through us looks like. It is loving our neighbor. So that's what we're going to talk about over these next few weeks. This is kind of the precursor, the let's get the curiosity flowing talk, right? Like, what questions do you have? Put them in the chat. Send them to us. Text the number that you saw on the screen. DeMarcus will say it again at the end of this thing. Text that number your questions. We'll dive into them throughout this next month, 2 months. What does this look like? What like a good neighbor? What does that look like? What is a good neighbor? Who is our neighbor? How do we operate in this? Not necessarily to give answers to these questions, but maybe to spark curiosity so that we'll be the ones asking questions of each other on our individual journeys with God. Like questions like, who is my neighbor? How do I love them? How do I love better today? How am I becoming love more and more today? These are questions that we get to ask ourselves every single day and dive into it. So how do we love? There's not one answer here. There are many expressions, and I want us to explore those. Throughout these next few weeks, we're going to do that. So this week, I want you to think of the idea that you love God when you're loving your neighbor. They are intertwined. So ask yourself this week, who is my neighbor? Ask God to reveal to you who your neighbor is. So who is your neighbor? Ask God what that looks like. Then let's brainstorm some ways that you can love them well. Like both God and your neighbor. How can you love them well? And we'll come up with some cool ways to do that over the summer. We'll do that in person here, online. We'll come up with some cool things that we can do to show that love for our neighbor, even through a platform like this. Let's be curious people. Let's Let's embrace the idea of questions, of curiosity, of stepping into this role like Jesus did, where questions were where he lived. He wasn't always there to give the answer. Quite frequently, he was the one asking the questions, challenging our thinking, challenging our wisdom and curiosity, challenging what we could come up with and how we would interpret it. So how are we becoming love more and more each day? Arsenal, I love you. Thank you so much for hanging out with us and being part of this experience. Hey, as we talk about becoming love, remember this week to go love well, because it's truly who you were made to be. We'll see you next week. Love you guys.
Hey, thank y'all so much for hanging out with us tonight. A couple quick things again before you leave. If you haven't already, text the number on the screen. I promise you, you won't regret it. And again, it's a cool way to stay connected with all that's going on within the Arsenal community. And hit the likes button, subscribe button, and the bell notification so that you are up to date with all that's going on, and that whenever we put out a video, things like that, you get a notification. And with that being said, why don't you check out one of these videos on the screen? Because again, it's super awesome, and so are you. Arsenal family, we hope you have an amazing week, and we can't wait to see you next week. Have a good one.